So this is what we're making, a basic claw setting on a flat base with a jump ring for a pendant, or a setting so that you can slip it into a hinged ring if you wish. You could quite easily just make this a regular ring just by soldering this to here. But for me it was two for the price of one thing. So we just make this a friction fit and a nice little ring. Cheers. I'm making a simple setting to hold a big piece of turquoise I have, and I didn't have a big enough piece of metal for the backing, so I took an old florin. This is a 1918, which means it's sterling silver, and I just rolled it through the rolling mill until it was the size and the thickness that I needed for the backing for my stone. I did use the rolling mill for this. You could anneal this and use a planishing hammer and work it, forge it until it was thinner and longer, which is exactly what people did in the early days. They didn't have anything like a rolling mill, and the only way to work the metal was to hammer it. So, saying that, I have my piece of metal. It's the right size, and I'm going to just use this as a base for a claw setting. So I'm going to scribe around and then saw this exactly the size as the stone. Now you could just hold this really tightly with your thumb, but you need to ensure that none of this moves. Because if it moves while you're scribing, then you won't have an exact line. So what I'm going to do is use double-sided tape to hold this on until I get my marks laid out. So position your stone and make sure that you see metal everywhere around the outside of it. I'm just going to use a fine point texture to mark, and it's okay if it gets on the bottom of the stone because you just take it off with methylated spirits. But this way it will mark on top of the tape. Beauty. So now we take our stone off and saw this out. I'm using a 4/0 blade in my saw, and I'm just leaving the tape on for now because I can just cut across the mark. And cut just to the outside of the mark so that you can file back to the mark. If you cut right on the mark, oftentimes when you file it back, it'll be slightly small. So now you can take your double-sided tape off. And the bits, you can see there isn't much left. This just goes in your sterling scrap because it is sterling. If you're using a coin that you're not sure what the quantity of silver is in it, or precious metals, you should take the coin, the country it's from, the date, and Google it. So now check your base against your stone. If it's slightly proud, great, because that way we can file it back and it'll be the right size. And you can see on one side of mine, you can see the serrated edge that was the coin. The curve was correct, so I just lined it up with the side of my coin. But now we need to file, and that gets rid of the serrated edge. So your flat number 2 cut hand file for all of these outside curves, and the inside curve, your number 2 cut half round ring file, and that'll fit right in there. So scrub this sideways as you're pushing, and that'll help smooth out the little ripples. So file back to your marks. Check against the stone when it's the correct shape and the correct cleanliness with the file. You're going to take your split mandrel on your handpiece and just go around the edge, and just to take the file marks off. We're not actually trying to remove any metal or reshape this. We're just trying to make it clean enough that we can solder our claws on and not have to go back and try to clean in between the claws. And you can see I'm bracing my hands together so I'm more stable. So just go all the way around, then hit the edges at about a 45-degree angle, and we're ready to put our claws on. So I'm going to mark on the top where I want my claws, because I can just shift my stone back a little bit. So I'll just mark with my texture. So one there, one there, one there, one there, and one here, and one here. So what I'm doing is I'm holding this lobe, and this lobe, and one in here to keep it from moving around. So that looks like 6, which makes it quite easy. Transfer your lines to the back, and you can do that just by looking at your mark on the front, dragging your pen, in this case a texture. I use texture because you can take it off just using methylated spirits or alcohol to most of you. So once you get those marks on the back, turn it over, look, make sure that you got all your marks, and then we're going to solder our claws on the back. So you can see how I have my marks. Now what I'm going to do for aesthetics is I'm going to shift this one to the middle, and I'm going to shift this one down a little bit so that there's more even spacing around the mark, so it'll look a little bit better from the front once we push our claws over. I'm going to use 1.2 millimeter wire because this is a fairly substantial stone, and the 1.2 will be plenty big. Now what I'm going to do is get the curve that I think I need for my claw. So you can see that it's just like this. Yeah. So I'm going to put a full curve on it so that on the inside, when you look at this from the back, you'll just see this half-rounded shape there, 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 and I'll bring them in. I'll mark the inside of this so that they all come in the same amount, so that it's a little more aesthetic rather than just random placing. So I'm going to make the same curve for everything. Now you could push this around just about anything as long as it has the right curve. So that's a fairly big curve, but all we need to do is place it so that we have about 10 mil of this sticking out of each side. And once I get all these cut, what I'm going to do is just lightly planish it with the hammer so that it's slightly flat, so that it solders onto the back of this spitter. I've set my calipers at 5 millimeters. Tighten this so it doesn't move. Then I'm just hooking the bottom edge over the metal, dragging the back around, and this will give me a mark at 5 millimeters all the way around. And this is where I'll set the inside of my claws.